This is the hierarchy. This is the proper flow of authority. God created man, man created government. But when you teach the wrong things for a really long time, and you have generations of people who send their children to school to be trained by government, to be trained in the way of government, to be trained that government is their protector, government is their provider, government is their authority, you end up with an averted flow of authority, where the people actually believe that whatever comes from the ivory towers of government is God and must be obeyed without question. That's not America. This is America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator. We are superior in our authority over government. Government is our creation. We are not created by government. We are rulers over government. They are subject to us, and it's not the other way around. And that's what we need to remember. But then the Declaration of Independence says that to secure these rights, the inalienable ones, given to us by the nature of our creation, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. This is your litmus test. This is your standard. This is how you know whether you have to obey an order, a regulation, or a law or not. Is that order, is that regulation, is that law derived from the consent of the governed? Because you see, if it is derived from the consent of the governed, it is a just power. But if it is not derived from the consent of the governed, it is an unjust power. Say that. Do you see that? So the question then becomes, what did we consent to? See, you have no obligation to comply or submit to unjust government. So how do you know if government is just or not? Are they operating by your consent? Well, what did I consent to? Here's the great news. You live in America. We wrote our consent down. The Constitution of the United States is our consent to just federal government. The Constitution of your state is your consent to just state and local government. If they do anything outside your Constitution, contrary to your Constitution, it is an unjust power outside your consent. We wrote it down in writing on purpose so that the people would always know what their government is allowed to do and to know the limits of their government so they know when it's time to resist. That's what's important. The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution of your state is the supreme law of your state. And you have to know. If you don't know, then you are a subject in a kingdom ruled by a shire. I want to show you for a few minutes that the constitutions are our consent and what your state Constitution says. We have been trained, I say brainwashed, into thinking that all the solutions to our problems come from Washington, D.C. No, the majority of our problems come from Washington, D.C., not their solutions. But you see, in that mindset, and being a constitutional lawyer, I see all the time. The Second Amendment, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. I wish we would stop doing that. Your state constitution has its own Bill of Rights. If your governor is violating your rights, if your county is violating your rights, if your city is violating your rights, your solution is not with the U.S. Constitution, it's with your state constitution. Stop running to the federal government to fix everything, because every time we do, we simply reinforce the ideology that they are the kingdom rulers and that states are colonies and subject to them. This is the oath. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the duties of the office of Sheriff of the state of Texas, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of this state. If you enforce a law that is contrary to the Constitution, you are violating your oath to protect, preserve, and defend the Constitution. So it is the Constitution that is the primary test. If it's constitutional, then you can support the law. If it's not constitutional, then you have a duty to refuse to enforce it. You have to be able to identify the difference. When I worked for a bank, we were taught how to identify a counterfeit dollar. And it might be interesting to you who have never worked for a bank that we didn't study counterfeits. To identify a counterfeit dollar, you don't study all the counterfeits. That's impossible. To identify a counterfeit dollar, you study the real thing until you know it like your own face, so that any deviation that comes across is immediately noticed. You have to study your Constitution so you know when law deviates from it. Look at this. Article 1. Your Bill of Rights. This is what you consented to. Inherent. All political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit. You have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to peaceably assemble. Maybe we should look at that for a second. The citizens shall have the right in a peaceable manner to assemble together for their common good, to apply those invested with the powers of government for redress of grievances or other purposes by petition, address, or remonstrance, as long as the county judge thinks it's safe. Is that what it says? You shall have the right. That is unequivocal. You have the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. This is what you consented to. Check this out. Section 17. No person's property shall be taken, damaged, or destroyed for or applied to public use without adequate compensation being made. When your businesses were told they had to shut down, how many of those businesses got their due process in the courtroom and just compensation? That was a seizure of that business without due process. It's a violation of at least 3 sections of Article 1. If a government is going to order your business to be closed, Section 17 says they must give them just compensation for that loss. Separation of powers. Are you ready? This is actually Article 2. The powers of the government of the state of Texas shall be divided into 3 distinct departments, to wit, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Check this out. No persons or collection of persons being of one of these departments shall exercise any power properly attached to either of the others, except in the instance herein expressly permitted. Remember, if it's not expressly in the Constitution, you didn't consent to it, and it's an unjust power. The executive branch enforces laws. Do you know what that means? The executive branch is not authorized to write laws. If the executive branch is issuing executive orders expecting them to be enforced as laws, they are violating separation of powers. I'm just trying to show you, it's very simple to know if a law or a regulation or an EO is just. It is simple to know, but it may be hard to do the right thing. There is no position which depends on clearer principle than that every act of a delegated authority contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. Power without consent is null and void. Sheriffs all over America standing up and saying, we will not comply with these unjust orders. This is a letter written by Sheriff Mike Harrington of Chavez County, New Mexico, to the governor of New Mexico. You will not lock down my county. My businesses will stay open. You will not send the state police because I outrank the state police. You will not send your agencies because I outrank them. He says, as a constitutional officer, it's my duty and obligation to defend the Constitution of the state of New Mexico against all violations and abuses of power. You guys know this guy. Stand up. Go ahead. Brad Rogers was one of my first heroes in learning about the sheriff. Brad Rogers got sick and tired of the USDA and the FDA raiding his Amish farmers searching for weapons of mass destruction. You know, raw milk and cheese. He issued a letter to the and this was one of my favorite parts. The letter to the USDA telling them to tell their FDA friends that if you come to my county and effectuate your warrants without first coming to get my permission, I am going to arrest your agents for trespass and you're going to have to bail them out of my jail. Now watch this. He got bipartisan praise. This is the statement. He says, your local officials can stem the tide of federal overreach if they apply just a little backbone in supporting and defending the Constitution. But here's the key, guys. They won't do it until you expect it and you demand it. It has to come from you. All power is derived from you. Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, I'll be a guardian of the Constitution for you, and I will not stand idly by while the rights of my county are trampled, whether criminals or an overreaching government. Your Texas Constitution is the supreme. If you're violating the law, you are a criminal. So why is it not recognized that when our elected people violate the Constitution, it's not just simply an unconstitutional act, it is a criminal act? Now, in my book on sovereign duty, on the website libertyfirstsociety.com, I have a whole section on why the Supremacy Clause does not make the federal government supreme. You are lied to about that. That is the most common lie, and it is the most destructive lie that has been sewn into the fabric of the American education system. You need to know why the Supremacy Clause actually says the exact opposite. That the federal government is not supreme, and that at times the states are supreme to the federal government. Because power without consent is null and void. And even the Supreme Court says so. Well, you can boo him, but he actually knows the truth. He's just a coward and won't do it. He says the states are separate and independent sovereigns, and they have to act like it. He says we here at the Supreme Court are expecting the states and the local government to refuse to comply with the federal government. They're such cowards, they don't want to do their job, but they know you have the right to do it. Sheriff Marty Gleave. Sheriff Mack, one of the most humble men I have ever met in my life. Yes. Laughing, he's like, what? Just a really nice guy. We actually have sheriffs who were deputizing, where was this? In New Mexico, I have a sheriff who deputized the entire congregation of the church so that they would not shut down the church. James Wilson, the power of the Constitution predominates, and anything, therefore, that shall be enacted by Congress or by your governor or by your county judge, contrary thereto, will not have the force of law. This is your oath. To the Constitution first, to the law second. And this is why we have to stand. You see, peaceful noncompliance is the key to restoration of American principles. When you refuse to comply with laws written contrary to the Constitution, outside the Constitution, you are not breaking that law. You are actually enforcing the supreme law of the land, because it's those in government who have violated the law. Defend the constitutions, defend the rights of the people against all who would deny them, criminal citizens or criminal government. That is the role and the duty of the sheriff.